I moved into an old house a month ago. The rent was cheap and I needed a place close to work. At first, everything seemed fine. The neighbors were friendly and the neighborhood was quiet. But then, strange things started happening. Every night at exactly 3:15 a.m., I hear whispering. It starts as a faint murmur, growing louder and louder until it feels like the walls themselves are speaking. I can never make out the words, but it always sounds like multiple voices talking at once. I tried to ignore it, thinking it was just my imagination. But last night, it got worse. As the whispering grew louder, I saw shadows moving across my bedroom walls. They didn't look like normal shadows. They twisted and writhed, as if they were alive. I bolted from my room and spent the rest of the night on the couch. This morning, I found something etched into the wall above my bed. It was a single word: leave. I'm writing this from a hotel room. I don't know what's in that house, but I'm not going back to find out.
I work the night shift at a call center. It's usually quiet, and most of the calls I get are mundane. But one night, I received a call that still haunts me. It was around 2 a.m. when the phone rang. I answered with my usual greeting, but there was only static on the other end. I was about to hang up when I heard a faint voice. It sounded like a child, whispering, "Help me." I tried to get more information, but the line went dead. I shrugged it off, thinking it was just a prank. But then, the calls started coming more frequently. Each time, it was the same child's voice asking for help. I reported it to my supervisor, but there was nothing they could do. The calls weren't traceable. I even contacted the police, but they dismissed it as a hoax. Last night, I got another call. This time, the voice was clearer. The child said, "They're here." Then the line went dead. Immediately after, all the lights in the call center went out, and the room plunged into darkness. I don't know what's going on, but I'm terrified to go back to work tonight.
When we bought our new house, we were thrilled. It was a fixer-upper, but it had so much potential. While exploring the house, we found a door hidden behind an old bookshelf in the basement. It was locked, and we couldn't find the key. After weeks of searching, we finally decided to break the lock. Inside, we found a small, dusty room. It was filled with old furniture covered in white sheets, and the air was thick with the smell of mildew. In the center of the room was a single old-fashioned crib. My wife and I exchanged puzzled looks, wondering why someone would hide a nursery. As we moved closer, we noticed something strange. The crib was rocking slightly, as if someone had just been there. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind us. We tried to open it, but it was stuck. Then we heard it. A soft, ghostly lullaby filling the room. My wife screamed, and we both pounded on the door until it finally gave way. We ran out of the basement and called a locksmith to change every lock in the house. We haven't been back to that room since, and we don't plan to. Whatever is in there, it's better left forgotten.
I inherited an antique mirror from my grandmother. It was a beautiful piece, with an ornate gold frame. She always said it was a family heirloom, passed down through generations. After bringing it home, I hung it in my bedroom. That night, I noticed something odd. My reflection didn't quite match my movements. At first, it was subtle. A delayed blink, a hand not quite lining up with mine. I thought I was just tired, but over the next few nights, it got worse. My reflection would smile when I wasn't smiling, or turn its head when I was still. I started covering the mirror at night, but I could still feel its presence. One evening, I decided to remove the mirror. As I was about to take it down, my reflection spoke. It whispered, "Don't leave me." I froze, unable to move. My reflection reached out, its hand passing through the glass. I dropped the mirror, shattering it into pieces. I thought it was over, but now, every time I pass a reflective surface, I see those same eyes staring back at me, waiting.
A few weeks ago, I started hearing a persistent knock on my front door every night at exactly 2 a.m. It was a soft, steady knock, not loud enough to wake the neighbors, but enough to send chills down my spine. At first, I thought it was some kind of prank. I ignored it, hoping it would stop. But each night, the knocking continued. I looked through the peephole every time, but there was never anyone there. One night, I decided to catch the prankster in the act. I stayed up, sitting in the dark living room, waiting for the knock. Right on schedule, it came. I jumped up and flung the door open, but no one was there. I stepped outside, looking around, but the street was empty. When I turned back to go inside, the door slammed shut behind me, locking me out. I banged on the door, trying to get back in, when I heard the knock again, this time from inside the house. I haven't heard the knock since that night. But now, every time I pass my front door, I can feel a presence on the other side, waiting.
My daughter Emily has always loved dolls. She has a whole collection of them, neatly arranged in her room. For her birthday, my sister sent her a beautiful porcelain doll she found at an antique store. Emily adored it and named it Clara. Almost immediately after Clara arrived, strange things started happening. At night, I would hear giggling coming from Emily's room, even when she was fast asleep. Toys would move around on their own, and once, I found all of Emily's dolls arranged in a circle on the floor, with Clara in the center. Emily started having nightmares and waking up screaming about a lady who wanted to take her away. One morning, she came to me, terrified, saying Clara whispered to her at night. I decided to get rid of the doll. I put it in a box and left it at the end of the street. That night, Emily's nightmares stopped and everything seemed to go back to normal. But the next morning, Clara was back, sitting on Emily's bed with a note that read, "You can't get rid of me." I don't know how to get rid of this doll, but I'm afraid of what will happen if I try again.
I'm a paranormal investigator, and a few months ago, my team and I decided to explore an abandoned asylum that was rumored to be haunted. It was a massive building, long since forgotten, with peeling paint and broken windows. We set up our equipment and started our investigation. At first, we found nothing but the usual creaks and groans of an old building. But then, we heard it. A soft, eerie humming coming from the end of the hallway. We followed the sound to a locked door. We managed to pry it open and found a small room filled with old medical equipment. In the corner was a single bed with restraints. The humming stopped, and the room went deathly cold. Suddenly, one of our cameras picked up movement. A shadowy figure stood in the corner watching us. We tried to communicate, but it remained silent. Then, the figure started moving towards us, slowly at first, then faster and faster. We bolted from the room, leaving our equipment behind. When we reached the entrance, the door slammed shut, trapping us inside. We could hear footsteps approaching, but there was no one there. We finally managed to break a window and escape. We never went back for our equipment, and I quit the team shortly after. Sometimes I still hear that eerie humming in my dreams, and I wake up in a cold sweat, feeling like I'm still in that asylum.
Growing up, I lived in a small house with my parents and younger sister. My bedroom was on the second floor, with a large window overlooking the backyard. I often stayed up late reading, with the moonlight streaming in. One night, as I was reading, I glanced up and saw a face in the window. It was a man, staring at me with wide, unblinking eyes. I screamed and my parents came running, but by the time they arrived, the face was gone. They told me it was just my imagination, but I knew what I saw. The next night, it happened again, and the night after that. Every night, the same face appeared, watching me. I started closing the curtains, but I could still feel his eyes on me. I stopped sleeping, too afraid of what I might see. My parents thought I was losing my mind and sent me to a therapist. Eventually, we moved to a new house and the face stopped appearing. I tried to forget about it, but it haunted me for years. Recently, I found an old newspaper article about a man who had gone missing in our old neighborhood. His face was the same one I saw in the window. I don't know how or why he appeared, but I'm terrified that he might find me again someday.
I'm a taxi driver and I've had my share of strange passengers. But one night, I picked up a fare that I'll never forget. It was late and I was about to end my shift when a woman flagged me down. She was pale and looked distraught. She asked to be taken to a nearby cemetery. It was an odd request, but I didn't question it. As we drove, she didn't say a word. When we arrived, she handed me an old, crumpled bill and got out. I watched as she walked into the cemetery, disappearing into the darkness. The next day, I found the same crumpled bill on my dashboard. I figured she must have dropped it, so I decided to return it. I drove back to the cemetery and asked the caretaker if he knew her. He told me no one fitting that description had visited recently. I described her again, and he went pale. He showed me a photograph from a grave. It was the woman. She had died over 50 years ago. Since that night, I found that crumpled bill in my taxi every morning. No matter how many times I get rid of it, it always comes back. I don't know what she wants, but I fear I'll never be free of her.
I work as a security guard at an old warehouse. The place is massive, filled with long, dark corridors and countless rooms. My shift starts at midnight, and it's usually quiet, but last night was different. Around 2 a.m., I heard footsteps echoing down one of the halls. I grabbed my flashlight and went to check it out. As I walked, the footsteps grew louder, but I couldn't see anyone. When I reached the end of the hall, the sound stopped. I turned to head back to my post, and that's when I saw it. A shadowy figure standing at the far end of the corridor. It didn't move, just stood there, watching me. I called out, but there was no response. I took a step forward, and the figure vanished. Shaken, I went back to my post, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every now and then, I'd hear faint whispers and catch glimpses of movement out of the corner of my eye. At the end of my shift, I checked the security footage. The cameras had captured the shadowy figure, but each time it appeared, the screen would flicker and distort. I don't know what's in that warehouse, but I'm not sure how much longer I can work there.
We moved into a new house last month. It's an old Victorian with lots of character and charm. In the attic, we found a small room filled with old toys and dusty furniture. My daughter Lily was thrilled and declared it her new playroom. A week later, Lily started talking about her new friend, Timmy. At first, I thought it was just an imaginary friend, but then strange things started happening. I'd hear Lily talking to someone when she was alone, and her toys would move around on their own. One night, I heard giggling coming from the attic. I went up to check and found Lily playing with a boy who looked like he stepped out of the past, dressed in old-fashioned clothes. When he saw me, he vanished. I asked Lily about Timmy, and she told me he used to live in the house a long time ago. She said he was lonely and wanted someone to play with. I did some research and found out that a boy named Timothy had died in the house over 100 years ago. I tried to tell Lily that Timmy wasn't real, but she wouldn't listen. Last night, I found a note in the attic, written in a childish scrawl. It said, "Thank you for bringing me a friend." I don't know how to help Lily, but I'm terrified of what Timmy might do if I try to take her away from him.
I love hiking and often go on solo trips into the mountains. Last fall, I decided to explore a new trail that was rumored to be haunted. According to local legends, several hikers had gone missing there over the years. The first day was uneventful, but on the second night, I woke up to the sound of someone crying. It was a soft, mournful wail coming from the woods. I grabbed my flashlight and went to investigate. As I walked, the crying grew louder. I followed it to a small clearing, where I found a woman standing with her back to me. Her clothes were torn and she was covered in dirt. When I called out to her, she turned around and I saw that her eyes were completely black. She opened her mouth to speak, but all that came out was that eerie wail. I turned and ran back to my camp, packing up my gear as quickly as I could. I hiked back to my car without stopping, feeling her presence behind me the whole way. When I reached the trailhead, I saw a missing persons poster with her face on it. She had disappeared 2 years ago on that very trail. I haven't gone hiking since, and I'm not sure I ever will again.
I used to babysit for a family who lived in a big old house on the edge of town. The parents would go out every Friday night, leaving me with their 2 kids, Emma and Jack. They were sweet kids, but there was something off about the house. Every time I put the kids to bed, I'd hear strange noises coming from the attic. It sounded like footsteps and whispering. I asked the parents about it, but they said it was just the house settling. One night after putting the kids to bed, I decided to check out the attic. I climbed the narrow stairs and opened the creaky door. The room was filled with old furniture and boxes. As I looked around, I saw a small wooden door at the far end of the room. I opened the door and found a tiny, hidden room. Inside was a single rocking chair, slowly moving back and forth, as if someone had just been there. On the walls were old photographs of a little girl, dressed in clothes from the early 1900s. I heard a soft giggle behind me and spun around, but there was no one there. I bolted from the attic and didn't go back up there again. The next day, the parents told me about their great aunt who used to live in the house. She had a daughter who died young, and they kept her room exactly as it was when she was alive. I quit that babysitting job soon after. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't the only one watching the kids.
I grew up in a small town surrounded by dense woods. As kids, we were always warned not to go into the forest at night. There were stories of people hearing strange voices calling their names, luring them deeper into the woods, never to return. One summer evening, my friends and I dared each other to spend the night in the woods. We brought sleeping bags and flashlights, laughing off the warnings as just old legends. Around midnight, we heard it, a faint voice calling my name. I thought it was one of my friends playing a prank, but they all swore it wasn't them. The voice grew louder, more insistent, and seemed to be coming from deeper in the woods. Against my better judgment, I followed the voice, my friends trailing behind me. As we walked, the forest grew darker, the trees closing in around us. The voice led us to a small clearing where we found an old, abandoned cabin. The door creaked open, and the voice beckoned us inside. My friends and I stood frozen in terror. Suddenly, the voice changed, becoming harsh and angry. We turned and ran, not stopping until we were back in town. The next day, we went back to the clearing with some adults, but the cabin was gone. There was no trace of it anywhere. To this day, I can still hear that voice in my nightmares, calling my name, luring me back to the woods.
When I was a kid, my friends and I used to explore the woods behind our neighborhood. One day, we stumbled upon a hidden tunnel entrance, partially covered by overgrown vines. It looked ancient and abandoned, so naturally, we decided to go inside. The tunnel was dark and damp, with walls lined with crumbling bricks. As we ventured deeper, the light from the entrance faded, and the air grew colder. We walked for what felt like hours, our flashlights flickering as if they were struggling to stay on. Eventually, we reached a large, open chamber. In the center was an old rusted iron gate. Behind it, we could see the faint outlines of strange, twisted shapes. Suddenly, the gate creaked open, and we heard a voice, a low, guttural whisper telling us to come closer. Panic set in, and we turned to leave, but the tunnel had changed. The path we came from was now a series of winding corridors, each leading to dead ends or back to the chamber with the gate. The whispers grew louder, now coming from all directions. We finally found our way back to the entrance and ran home. We never spoke about the tunnel again, but sometimes, late at night, I hear those same whispers outside my window, calling me back.
When my grandmother passed away, I inherited her old house. It was a beautiful but eerie Victorian mansion filled with antiques and family heirlooms. Among them was a large portrait of a stern-looking man that hung in the living room. Grandma always told me it was a distant relative, but she never said much more about him. After moving in, I started noticing strange things happening around the house. Objects would move on their own, doors would open and close, and at night, I'd hear footsteps echoing through the halls. One evening, I was dusting the portrait when I noticed something odd. The man's eyes seemed to follow me, no matter where I stood in the room. I dismissed it as a trick of the light, but the feeling of being watched grew stronger each day. One night, I woke up to the sound of whispering. I followed the noise to the living room, where I found the portrait hanging crookedly on the wall. As I straightened it, the whispering stopped, and I felt a cold hand on my shoulder. I spun around, but no one was there. The next day, I did some research and discovered that the man in the portrait was a notorious ancestor who had been accused of witchcraft and executed in the 17th century. His spirit was said to haunt the family home, seeking revenge for his unjust death. I moved out the next week, leaving the house and the portrait behind. But sometimes I still feel that cold hand on my shoulder, reminding me that he's not done with me yet.